In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your
Great point.
country.
I was not recording. They missed all that amazing banter we just had. And it's too late to replicate it, so we're just going to have to...
Too late. The moment's passed.
The moment's passed already, unfortunately. Hi, Taylor. How are you?
Good.
Happy Sunday. Happy first full week of the new year. Hopefully it's getting off to a pretty decent start for you guys over there.
Yeah, things are good. I've had my first week off. Next week's my next week off, and then I start my new job. But yeah, no, it's been great. I've been doing a ton of painting. I've been painting the inside of closets. So I just painted the inside of my closet like bright pink. It looks awesome.
I saw on Instagram. It looks amazing. You're doing a really good job.
It's very fun.
You have one more week of rest and relaxation, and then it's off to being back in the political sphere again.
Yeah. Yeah, excited.
You're rejoining us in a very troubling time, probably, but still, I'm sure it'll be interesting and bring back some fond memories. So
when isn't it a troubling time? Yeah, totally.
Very true.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can go ahead and kick things off. We are doomed to fail. This is our first full year. Actually, you know what? I think next week will be the first full year we've been doing this. And we are going to cover 2 stories, one historic, one true crime. But all the logic around that has been shifting, and so we'll see what the new year brings us. Again, if y'all have any recommendations, suggestions for things that you want to hear, first off, thanks for all the support for everybody who's been listening. So,
oh my God, so much. Thank you.
1 year of this has been incredible. And so if you have anything you want to suggest about topics you want to hear about, please do write to us at doomedtofailpod@gmail.com. Follow us on all the socials at doomedtofailpod. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Taylor, if my memory serves me right, you should be going first today.
Correct. I go first.
My memory has served me right. Great.
All right. I am going to take a picture because I have this thing, of us. Can you just smile? This is my drink. Can you see it?
Yes.
Guess what this is? I'm holding it up.
Piss.
It's not piss. It's whiskey, obviously.
Whiskey.
But guess how much it is.
It's a very small pour, so I'm gonna guess it's Pappy Van Winkle, so probably $45 a pour.
No, it is a dram of whiskey. This is a very small amount of whiskey. It's a teaspoon of whiskey. And if you are on, let's say, an expedition across uncharted lands, and you can only carry a finite amount of whiskey, you might be given a dram of whiskey a night to keep warm.
Oh, fun. It's like what the St. Bernard, no, St. Bernards don't bring you that, do they?
I think they bring you like bandages, and I think they bring you whiskey. Probably more. You think you deserve more than a dram? I mean,
yeah, probably.
Can you think of an expedition where you go across a bunch of uncharted land?
Lewis and Clark.
Yep.
There we go.
Well, I drank my dram, and it was delicious. And I am warmed up because it is cold. But yeah, let's talk about Lewis and Clark.
Love it. Yep, I'm into it.
Cool. So let's go west via the Missouri River. I read a book called Undaunted Courage, Meriweather Lewis, Thomas Jefferson, and the Opening of the American West. It's from 1997, which I guess is a long time ago. I was like,
I know.
Long ago. I know. But like it is a long time ago. And it's very like apologetic about some of the things that they did that are objectively bad. Like they were all like slave owners. He definitely in the book, the author is like, yeah, there's that rumor about Thomas Jefferson and his slave, but that's like unsubstantiated. And you're like, no, that's true. Like what? So there's a little bit of that. And he's also like, Meriweather Lewis was the greatest man of all time. And you're like, he's fine. He's not like the greatest man that ever lived though. But
I don't know anything about him, so I can't tell you if I think he's the greatest man who's ever lived.
He's not. I mean, no one is, but But anyway, if not, then who else would have done it if these guys didn't? So let me tell you a little bit about them and what they were going to do when they walked across the country. So I didn't realize how much Thomas Jefferson was involved in this. All I knew was like they walked across the country. They met a bunch of Indians. Sacagawea was there. You see that like picture of like Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea in a canoe. Can you
Yeah,
picture that? Yeah.
I can
Um,
actually.
and like in like a native museum, just like the three of them. But it was not just the three of them, definitely a lot more. But I will tell you a little bit more about everybody else. So the Lewis and Clark expedition was also known as the Corps of Discovery expedition. It was the first American expedition to cross the western portion of the United States. The two people that were the leaders were Captain Meriweather Lewis and Lieutenant William Clark. Lewis had recommended that Clark also be a captain, but they didn't give him that title, but they treated each other as equals. So they're both in charge. So Meriwether Lewis, his name was Meriwether. That's his mom's maiden name. That's where that kind of random name comes from. He was born on August 18th, 1774. He loved his mom a lot. He loved his family. He was a big, like, family guy. He really wanted to be educated, but it was hard during this time. Like, it was hard to find a school. There just weren't schools. You
Sorry,
had to, like, get
what
a
year?
1774.
Oh God, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, like, he needed to, like, try to find tutors and like try to get someone to like live with to like learn a little bit. And he ended up joining the military, and he was involved in the Whiskey Rebellion, which was about taxes and the government wanting to tax people making whiskey. And I think actually, now that I say that, we talked about this. It's like, later, but we talked about the Hatfields and McCoys, like they had all that bootleg whiskey, and the bootleg thing really was that they weren't getting taxed on it.
Yeah,
That
of
was the problem,
course,
you
of
know?
course.
So um, so he was in the Whiskey Rebellion, obviously like on the government side, and that's when he met William Clark and they became friends. They were both in the army together. Then Lewis became the personal secretary to Thomas Jefferson. So he was with him for 2 years, just the two of them together, like writing, and while Thomas Jefferson was president. So he spent so much time with him. He lived with him. And in the book I read, it's like they spent all this time alone together. You're like, sure, they like were in a house together, but it was also full of enslaved people. It wasn't just them. They both had like obviously atrocious ideas about slavery. Thomas Jefferson, he always was like, yeah, 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 like we definitely shouldn't do it, but we can't do it now because I wouldn't have any money, essentially, And you're
Little
like,
perverse incentive there. You probably shouldn't be the one making that decision.
yeah, you're like, well, yeah, you're not gonna have as much money as you have now when you pay people. That's the way that
Unique
what?
concept.
So yeah, so that's, so they had that. They did think that Indians could be brought into society. And there's a lot of like, oh, we promise everything's going to be okay and you're going to be a part of this great land of America. And we all know that that was not true,
Right.
that they said to Indians like that at all. So Thomas Jefferson is president. He wants someone to run an expedition to the West. He wants to see what's out there. He really, really wants a direct river across the country. That would have been great. That didn't happen. There is not one, but it would have been great. It would have been really easy to do a lot more trading. The really big thing that people were trading on at this time was fur. So you would like trap a beaver first, and you would sell it to a someone in like on the Mississippi River for $1. And then they would take that beaver pelt and they would sell it to someone in New York for $4. And then they would take it on a boat to Europe and sell it to someone in Europe for $10. Like it was really like if you're on the end of it, you're making a shit ton of money on
Makes
fur.
sense.
So that was actually the big thing that they found. They didn't do a lot of geology, so they weren't looking for gold, but they should have because there actually was gold in them hills, but that came later. But anyway,
So wait, the starting point here is Philadelphia, right?
no, it's actually St. Louis.
Got it. Okay.
But I will tell you about, I'll get to that in one sec. So one thing that Thomas Jefferson needed someone who was super smart, super loyal to run this expedition. So he actually helped Lewis get more education and spend a lot of time with scientists, with botanists to be able to really like meticulously capture the stuff that he was seeing. So he would like dry plant specimens, he could tell latitude and longitude, like all the kind of things that you need to do if you're on that kind of mission with the goal to report back.
Right.
So William Clark the other captain, was born on August 1st, 1770. He's a little, just like a couple of years older. He fought in a whole bunch of Indian wars. His older brothers fought in the Revolutionary War. He was more of a frontiersman and explorer than a more of a gentry guy, but they really liked each other. They became really good friends, and so they ended up, doing this together. They were also both Freemasons, because like everybody was then too,
Yeah, makes sense.
all the white dudes. So it's 1803. Thomas Jefferson is president. He acquires the Louisiana Territory from who?
Russia.
Napoleon.
Damn it.
Um,
Alaska
but
was Russia.
I think so. Yeah. I'm not even sure, but there actually am going to talk about Russia in a second because so Napoleon had gotten Louisiana, and that isn't just like the state of Louisiana. That's like the middle of America, kind of, from the Spanish, and they were on their way to the French were on their way, but Napoleon was like, I don't really have time to do this. Remember, he was busy. And
Right.
so like he'd never been here. So he was happy to sell it because he was like, oh, I just sold something that I was never really going to do anything with anyway. So he was happy with it. So a lot of our people that we've talked about before are in this story. There was someone who tried to navigate that Alaskan way, like through like going up through Alaska, like into Russia, trying to get across that passage. And Catherine the Great arrested him and sent him back to Poland. He was Polish, so like sometimes I thought that was funny. Louis the 16th is sending people to like via Canada, try to find this route. Captain Cook and his people are, going around the bottom of South America. So a lot of people trying to figure out this, connecting the world for the first time. And then of course, people already lived there, you know.
I know. At first, I was like, "Oh, it's like, yeah, of course, that'll be a huge deal." I'm sure a lot of countries wanted to do that because it's
Yeah,
unsettled land. I was like, "Wait a minute, it
it's
was
not.
settled land."
Mhm. Yes, exactly. So people lived there for thousands of years, and Lewis and Clark weren't even the first white people to do this. And of course, the first white people to do this were the people looking for like the fur trade, and like looking for money and looking for ways that they can exploit the area and exploit the people and all the things. And people are like slowly moving west and like getting these like land grants, but you're like, no one owns this land, but all of a sudden it's yours. Like, all the ridiculous things that happen. And they're going to encounter a lot of the native tribes on their way and like, bring disease and all those things, those stories that we've heard before. Um, they also recorded seeing passenger pigeons, which we also talked about before, and that was fun. The expedition officially began on May 14th, 1804, and they departed from St. Louis, Missouri. So as part of the preparations, Lewis got Clark involved. He had to like mail him a letter and be like, "Will you please join me?" And it took like a month and a half to get a reply, which is infuriating. I can't even imagine how long you have to wait for the mail
So
to get
wild.
answers for things.
It's like
It's
by
wild.
the time you get your response, like I forgot about this.
Yeah,
I've
like
moved on to the next project.
he could be like on his way, but it could be over. Like who knows? It's just bananas. But everything's so slow, but he's buying a ton of supplies and he has an unlimited amount of money. So Lewis's salary for being secretary to Thomas Jefferson was $500 a year. And in like one day in St. Louis buying supplies, he spends $2,000. Like, could you imagine spending four times your salary on
On
something?
supplies. Well, okay. I would do that under the circumstance that I'm going somewhere that I've never been. I have
Hmm.
no idea what's there. There's a
Hmm.
better than 70% chance I'll never come back.
Hmm.
So creditors can't do anything about it. So yeah, sure, spend all the money.
That's fair. That totally makes sense. Yeah, and there's no like you have like a letter from Thomas Jefferson that says that you're good for it, and he like would buy a bunch of stuff for that letter. Also very fun.
Yeah, but I would
Yeah,
also assume that at that point, like we galvanized Thomas Jefferson and like the founding fathers at that point. Did people really care?
he was. I mean, he was currently president.
But who? But president of what? Like 7,000 people that lived here at that time? Like, is it really that big of a deal?
Yes.
Okay,
What kind of
because like no, because
is
like,
it
okay,
that big of a deal to be Thomas Jefferson?
I'm
Yes,
saying back then. Now, yes, reflecting back on it, back then,
I think still yes. I
I'm gonna
feel very
get so much.
confident.
We're gonna get so much hate mail.
I have a confident yes on this for
Okay,
anyone
fine,
about to write hate mail.
fine.
I think it
I
was still a
stand.
big deal.
I stand corrected.
So, um, and also he had more people. About 30 people went on the trip altogether, which is not, I feel like, what you think. It's just like a couple guys, but it was about 30 people. There was a enslaved man named York who went as well. And he was just as helpful as everybody else. And he was, a part of the team. And later, when everybody got paid, of course, York did not get paid or even set free. And he probably was enslaved for the rest of his life. We're not 100% sure, which
Jeez.
is bullshit. So I'm just going to list some interesting things that happened and kind of tell you to get an idea of like what this trip was like. So they did a lot for science. They were the first to record many animals. So like obviously people had been seeing these animals for thousands of years, but they were the first people to like scientifically write it down like for white people. But even though that's like annoying because they were like saying they discovered these things that had already been discovered, it still sounds real fun, you know? Like imagine like seeing a coyote for the first time and you've never seen one before. You see birds that you've never heard of before. They look like aliens. Like
Yeah,
that's
no,
cool.
but then you got to come up with all the names. I mean, how many different ways can you describe a coyote versus a fox versus a wolf versus a gray wolf versus a
Oh yeah,
dog?
yeah.
It's
No, they definitely named well, they named like of course they named like all the rivers and mountains like after their friends and you know,
yeah,
how
that's your right.
you know how that goes. Of course they are all had names. But so they would take samples of trees and plants, like try new vegetables, try new things, which I think is super fun. Just like going into some place where there's potentially something you've never seen before. Thomas Jefferson was pretty sure they were going to see a mastodon. They did not. They did not see a mastodon, but
It's
he
unfortunate.
thought they might. So Lewis would write all the time in his field journals. He would tell the longitude by calculating the sun and Greenwich Mean Time somehow. So he would have everything in his journal. Kind of like a funny bit is that they really couldn't spell anything. It just like spelling wasn't that important then, and it was like harder. So like the journals were like kind of hard to read because they spelled things like different every time they wrote it down. But sometimes also the journals would be have big spaces between the entries because Lewis was probably a manic depressive and he would get in like a way where he didn't want to write anything down and he was, having a hard time like moving forward. And that happened pretty often during the trip. So there's also some health things. So they did a lot of hunting, obviously. So they ate, you know, buffalo and beavers and deer, and they actually ate dogs a lot as well. And that was like something they would eat all the time. And they would like bury supplies along the road and like cook food and like have it last a little bit longer, that kind of thing. But you can't just eat meat. Like you need other things as well. And did you ever watch that show Alone? People are like in the wilderness.
No.
It's like people, that's it. They're alone in the wilderness and then they have to like outlast everybody else. But I watched one season and where a guy killed a moose, but he was like starving because the moose was like very lean meat and it's just like not enough. Like you can't live on that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they would like, you know what I mean? So they would like consume like 12 pounds of like deer meat a day, but still be hungry because they didn't have like the right nutrients. And they didn't really like know a lot about nutrients anyway. They just like kind of knew what made them feel better and what didn't. So they would eat like when there was fruit, they would eat fruit. But they were sick a lot. There was lots of like diarrhea, trying to like get their bodies to adjust. Obviously, they just like were drinking whatever water they could find. So like that wasn't always the best water. A lot of the cures and like the medicine was, made of mercury. Of course it was. And there was a doctor named Dr. Rush, and he sold these pills that were Dr. Rush's bilious pills, or also called Rush's Thunderbolts, and they just made you poop like nobody's business. It was like mercury and like other poisons, and that made most things better. They probably had like
As it does.
yeah, just like weird food poisoning and stuff. There were also a shit ton of mosquitoes. And this is before they knew that like mosquitoes cause malaria or, yellow fever or any of those like really bad diseases. So they would, some of the guys did get malaria. One guy died, I think it was of malaria, but only one person died of the group, which I think is pretty impressive. And so they had that. They also would meet with Indian tribes along the way, and they would, sleep with all the Indian women, obviously.
Right.
In the book I read, it was like the Indian women thought it was an honor that they could like get their bravery from having sex with them. And I was like, I don't know. Whatever. Like, I'm not sold on that, but that they were like
There's
excited about it.
yeah, there's definitely other
Yeah,
reasoning.
right. But because of that, guess what else they had?
Children.
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. No, they had syphilis, like
Yeah.
so much syphilis. They were riddled with STDs, just like everyone in history is. So,
Wait, did we
yeah,
get syphilis from the Native Americans?
no, we gave it to them, and then like they had it, and like the French, like it was like a whole thing, you know.
Got it.
I'm sure they had like their own STDs,
Yeah.
but anyway, new ones, more. Everyone had syphilis during this time. Also in the book I read, they were like Lewis and Clark did not partake in sleep with Indian women. I'm like, of course they did. Don't be dumb, but whatever.
I know
So
you gotta preserve whatever,
yeah,
it's still human.
yeah, yeah. Um, so they also did a lot of like little side travels where they'd be like, okay, I'm gonna walk east for 2 days, and then I'll meet you guys somewhere else, and they would find each other, which I think is crazy because I feel like if you and I were like at the mall, I could lose you for a day and a half.
I mean,
Like
yeah, but at the same time, they're out in the middle of nowhere, so you could just
it's true.
like shout and probably
Yeah,
like hear them.
probably. Oh, another animal they met was a grizzly bear for the first time. At first, they were like, it seems like no big deal. And then, like, later on, they're like, ah, because it was like really fucking hard to kill them. Like, way harder than they thought it was going to be, which is great for the bear. They also, obviously, like, saw like the huge herds of buffalo and all the stuff that, like, you think of when you think of like a empty American West. So also, it's 30 people. It's a couple of years. It takes about 2 years to finish the whole expedition. So sometimes the men would, do something wrong. They would like drink too much whiskey. They would, you know, kind of like try to leave, things like that. So they would have like little trials within the group, and then the punishment was usually like lashings, like 100 lashings, and then the person would have to be like cool with it and be back on the team, which seems crazy. They also made contact with over 70 Native American tribes, and they described over 200 new plants and animals. Lewis was on a mission from Thomas Jefferson to tell everybody about him. So he would like, this is so stupid. He would like go to these chiefs of these tribes, and he didn't speak their language. He had some people who did speak languages that were like close. So things would have to be translated like 4 times, between
Yeah.
a bunch of different people. A lot of times it was just sign languages as well. It wasn't even like, it was even harder to translate. So he would go and say, do you remember like yesterday when the Spanish were in charge and then the French for a minute and the Indians were like, what?
Like
Okay.
leave us out of this.
Yeah. And then he would put on like a nice military outfit and he would say, congratulations, you have a new great father in the East, meaning Thomas Jefferson. Like, ew.
Leave them alone. For the love
Like,
of God, leave them alone.
insane. And so then he would, and then he'd give them like medals and certificates that were like, this is from your new great father, blah, blah, blah. And they were kind of like, do you have any whiskey and guns? They're like, we don't want those things. So some of the problems that they would have is like the Indian tribes would be like, why would we help you? You're not giving us anything, Like we're having our own like wars with other tribes around here anyway. Like we need more than just like this dumb certificate from this another white man, you know?
Yeah.
So, oh, also his speech would be like 4 hours long too. Like, could you imagine watching someone speak in a language you didn't understand, wearing a silly jacket and hat and telling you that you have a new father? You'd be like,
It's like the worst graduation ceremony in
exactly. Like,
history.
what are you talking about? So they met a lot of different tribes. They met the Mandan and the Hadassah, the Chinook, the Sioux, the Blackfeet. The Blackfeet were the most dangerous of the tribes that they met. This is where they killed. They admitted at least to killing a Blackfoot Indian as because he was attacking them. So they were the most aggressive, but there was always like the threat of being attacked by an Indian tribe. They met the Shoshone, and that's where they met Sacagawea. So Sacagawea, poor fucking girl. She was married to a French Canadian named Toussaint Charbonneau. And like, want to tell you about him a little bit? He's the worst, but I'll put a picture of him on social media because there's like one painting of him and he looks hilarious and kind of awesome, but he's not. But the painting's fun. But he either bought her or won her in a gambling thing when she was 13 years old and took her away to be his wife. And he also had another wife who was also a child. So he had two child brides. The other one was just called Otter Woman. She didn't even have a name.
Otter,
Yeah,
Otter.
yeah, like the animal.
I mean,
And like
he does look pretty cool.
I know, but he has two child brides, so it's not great. So he had the otter girl stay home during this, but he was like, we'll come with you because, we can help you with translations. We know a lot about the different routes. So they joined after they met with the Shoshone. So Sacagawea was pregnant when they set off on the journey and joined them and started going. They went like over the Rockies and like all the way to the West Coast, and she had the baby on the trail. And it was like a long, slow birth. She was in a lot of pain. They made her a drink out of rattlesnake um rattler. They like ground it up and like made a drink out of it, and that was supposed to make her feel better. And you're like, I'm just so happy that I had my babies in a hospital.
Yes, seriously.
It's unfucking believably awful. But so then she had this baby, and I feel like that's something that we also know about her is that she carried an infant the whole entire time. And it reminds me of, you know, the saying that like everything that Fred Astaire did, Ginger Rogers did backwards and in heels. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know who Ginger Rogers is, and I don't really
So
know
like
much of Fred Astaire either.
so Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers are like, like the best dancing couple ever. And like, yeah, what he did was impressive, but everything she did the same thing backwards and wearing heels because she'd like do it with him. You know what I mean? It's like it was just harder for Sacagawea than everybody else
Got it.
because she had a
Got it.
baby and she was a child herself. And so they called her Janie, and her son was named Jean Baptiste. He ended up um, being adopted by Clark later in life, and he went to Europe. He spent some time there, so he had a pretty fun go of it. Her son had a kind of a fun frontiersman life. But Sacagawea helped with translation and navigation. When they met with one of the tribes on the way west, she saw her brother and was like super emotional and like crying because she had been sold to this like French guy and somehow found her brother again in all of America. So that was like super emotional for her. But she died in 1812. So a couple years later after the execution was over, and it's unknown how she died. She probably just like had a disease and died like people did then. And she was also never paid. They paid her husband, but they did not pay her, obviously, for her
Yeah, it's
help.
not surprising.
But she did get to be on that dollar coin. So
So
I
the
don't know. Pretty cool.
population in the 1700s of all of North America was 250,000.
Yeah.
Wait, no, I read this wrong. Sorry, it was 905,000. I'm just saying that it was like not that many people. So like running into people and you know, that's my point's irrelevant. Let's keep going.
Right, but the space is still big, you know?
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true. The
That's
space
what I
is big.
mean.
Yep,
Yeah, I
yep, you're
mean
right.
not that like, sure you'll see the same people over and over again, there's less people. But like how are you gonna find them in like the
Right,
Rocky Mountains, you know?
right. Fair. Fair
Yeah.
point.
Um, so another thing. Okay, this is one of the worst things I've ever read this last night. So one of the tribes that they met with and were really helpful to them, a really peaceful tribe was called the Nez Perce. And they helped them get across the Rockies. They gave them guides. They were super helpful. Clark probably had a child with one of them. But Nez Perce means nose piercing in French. So the French had named them that. And they having your nose pierced was not a thing that the tribe did. The French just named them that.
Wait, so
Are you
why
still
is that
here?
the worst thing?
Wait, but okay, I want to make sure you're still there. So
Okay, yeah.
because their name in their native language, is gonna be terrible, but it was Nimi Ipu, which means we the people, which is a beautiful name that's very peaceful and nice, but instead they have this like dumb nose pierce name from the French when they weren't even a tribe that necessarily had their nose pierced, and they'd lived in the Pacific Northwest for almost 12,000 years.
Isn't we the people also like something American now?
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I just thought that was shitty. So they're meeting all these tribes and they make it. The route that they took was, from St. Louis, they went up Iowa, up to the kind of the top of America, right below Canada, and then ended up going over the Rockies at the top and into the Pacific Northwest. They did the thing where they walked over and they saw the Rocky Mountains and they were like, all right, let's do it. And then they, found the way across the Rocky Mountains. Sometimes they have to stop for months at camp when it was really snowy, or they'd have to stay with like an Indian tribe if they were stuck because of the weather or whatever, because their horses were sick. All sorts of stuff happened, but they made it. They made it to the ocean, which is super exciting. And then they made it all the way back. And while they were gone, no one knew if they were okay, like you were saying with the creditors. Like you just didn't know. Like they would see white people every once in a while and be like, if you see someone, tell them that we're here, but barely.
Wait, they lived?
Yeah, they came back.
I thought they were eaten by cannibals.
I think in the diner party they ate each other.
Hold on, I need to figure this out. Exped.
Um, no, they lived. We've been silent for like 10 minutes now.
Oh, maybe, maybe it was maybe it was a Franklin expedition in the Arctic that ended in cannibalism.
Oh, didn't we already talked about that? Let me just keep going.
Okay, sorry, I'm derailing everything again.
Okay. So they got to the Pacific Ocean on November 15th, 1805. So remember that they left on May 14th, 1804. So it was about a year and a half to get to the Pacific Ocean. Then they turned around with all their stuff. Some of the stuff got ruined on the way. They had buried some of their things. And like pulled them up toward the end. They were like almost out of food, almost out of like gifts for the Indians. They did end up stealing a canoe from one of the tribes, and they probably did more of that as well, like without it. But they made it back to St. Louis on September 23rd, 1806. So they were gone from May 1804 to September 1806. While they were gone, Thomas Jefferson had been reelected president, and Aaron Burr had killed Alexander Hamilton. So like they didn't know
Fun.
what was going on, like in the America or in the world. So they was like finding out these things as they started to see people, and they were like feeling so obviously very excited, and they had been very homesick. They had no idea what was going on. They were just totally separate. They were also had been also sending Indian chiefs to Washington DC to Washington to meet with the president to start to like discuss sovereignty and all those things. And some of them made it. Some of those guys died, which was a bummer for peace talks, obviously. But that was happening too. But their families were okay. The woman that Clark had been in love with when he left was still around, still available. They got married, had a bunch of kids. Um, William Clark ended up doing more adventures. He became the governor of the Missouri Territory and the superintendent of Indian Affairs, and he died at age 68. So he had a pretty successful life. He adopted Sacagawea's kids. He, had 5 kids of his own, and then his wife died, and then he had 3 more kids with another lady. So he had a really like big life after this was over.
So
Um,
out of all those people, 29 survived.
yeah,
Wow, that's incredible.
isn't that incredible? Like
Yeah, I mean,
it was hard,
crossing.
but they did
I
it.
mean, because my thought process was that's why I was like, okay, just buy whatever you want because who cares? They're going to find your body anyways. Is like
Hmm.
if you twist an ankle, you're kind of dead. Like,
It's pretty. It is a miracle. So they had malaria. They had syphilis. At one point, toward the very, very end, someone accidentally shoots Clark in the butt, and it like goes through his butt cheek and through his thigh, and he lives. And like,
jeez,
I'm sure it was just like a disgusting wound forever, but like he didn't die, which it seems like he should have died from like sepsis or something, but he didn't.
yeah.
So, um, that's, you know, yeah, no, they came back. And so the next step, so Clark, he went off and did his own adventures. The men dispersed. They got paid. So they had to get like the government to give them like extra, money for their bravery, all those things, but they did end up getting paid. And the next thing was that Lewis needed to write everything down. He had his journals, he had everything that he had done, but it was very unorganized, obviously. It was like written on the road. He needed to get an editor and he needed to publish it because that's what he had told Thomas Jefferson that he would do. Thomas Jefferson told him he could have the rights to it so he could like sell it and make a ton of money. So he also had stopped some of the other men from selling their memoirs. So he had like bought their memoirs. So he was like able to, be the only person to sell the story. But what happened is he he didn't. He should have done all of these things and he just procrastinated. He was probably in one of his like depressive states. He didn't write to Thomas Jefferson for a while. Thomas Jefferson would write him letters and be like, super bummed you're not writing me back. What's going on?" And he like just like didn't answer. And he was also given the job of being the governor of the Louisiana Territory, which is a big deal. But he wasn't doing that job either. He stayed in St. Louis, and instead of working on the book that he had promised all these people, and instead of going to the Louisiana Territory and governing, he just kind of stayed. He didn't write much. He was in debt in like a bunch of weird ways. He was spending a lot of his money on booze. He was like drinking all the time. He wasn't talking to anyone. He's also probably riddled with STDs. Like all these things. And everybody's just waiting. And people started to kind of like forget and not even remember that he was supposed to publish this. It took him a while. And then, so this is Lewis on decided to go west back to the Louisiana territories so he could like actually do his job as governor. He was getting paid for it, but he was never there. October 19th, 1809, he stopped at a an inn called the Grinders Stand, which was 70 miles southwest of Nashville, so like around there. And actually, sorry, it was October 10th. And after dinner, he was acting kind of weird, and he went to his room, and the owner's wife, her name was Priscilla Grenier. She was like, he's acting really weird. I don't know what's going on. And so she went to his room and she heard gunshots. He had shot himself in the head, but he had not died. And he shot himself again, and he still hadn't died. And when they opened the door, he was cutting himself, just like
Jeez.
trying to die as by suicide as fast as he could. They tried to save him, but it was too late. So um, Meriwether Lewis died by suicide in 1809. He was super young. He had just come back from this big thing, but he didn't have it in him to like finish the job. And he was overtaken by a mental illness, probably also some PTSD because like being on the road for, a year and a half, sometimes 2.5 years, sometimes starving, always wondering if someone's going to come and scalp you, all those things. So he was unable to continue. And so he didn't even publish his works. It took a long time for someone to actually publish it and for it actually to be out there. They weren't actually published in full until 2004. And people forgot about it up for the most part until people started thinking about big exploration back in the 70s. And then by the time it was the 80s and we were in school, it was like a big deal. You learned about it all the time. But it took a long time for people to like remember and come back to it because he didn't get to publishing all the stuff that he did.
So Lewis, I looked it up. He was 35 years old when he died. Do
hmm
we know? So the idea was that he was basically traumatized or PTSDing it or something.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of everything. So like he was a little bit traumatized. He was also, I think, a little bit overwhelmed with the responsibility of like writing it all down now, kind of like finishing it up. He wasn't able to get that done. And he was also, he was most likely manic depressive and he was probably in like a depressive state at this point and just like unable to complete the task and like, unable to do the couple of things that he had to do. So it sounds like on the way to Louisiana to actually work on his job as being governor of that territory, he tried to die by suicide a couple times and then people stopped him and then he succeeded, eventually. And yeah, and died before he was able to publish anything or any of that. So it sounds like he was troubled in just in general and that there was some like depression in his family. So people who like knew his family, they weren't surprised, I
So
guess.
what was the point of all this? Just to find the Pacific Ocean?
Yeah, like obviously they knew it was there and they wanted that trade route between the East and the West. And they had hoped that it would be just like the Missouri River all the way through, but it ended up not being that. But that was what they wanted to see if you could do it, how long it would take, where it would take you. And like they went, north. There's an entire different landscape south, obviously, if they would have like gone this way. But yeah, they wanted to see if they could do it. And then also, meet with the native tribes, get them on their side. They just had acquired all this land and they were going to, people were already moving there. They were going to start sending Americans there, soon, all of that. So just kind of let us know what's out there. Let us know what you find, and then more people can do it later.
So what's your take on it?
I think it's like I'm half like it's super fun. Like they were able to be like, we're the first people to hold an election this side of the Mississippi, when they were like voting on things. And you're like, not really, because like obviously there were people living there for thousands of years. But, it's fun to at least have the idea of walking into the unknown, I think is something that, I guess unless we like went to the bottom of the ocean or to space, we just don't have that really. So I think that's really exciting. Um, I I mean, someone was going to do it eventually. So I think that this was like, a good team to do it. It's remarkable that they all survived, you
It
know?
is crazy that they all survived.
Yeah, and it's remarkable that we know what we know about the trip. They were great record keepers when they were keeping records. Some of the stuff, the specimens are like still around. We know what happened. All that stuff is really, interesting and fun because you're like, these people they walked into the nothing for 2.5 years and they came back with some like fun stories. They'd met a lot of people, all that stuff. So I think it's pretty fun. I'm glad that we know about it and have as many records of it as we do, even though, obviously, um, I'm sure like the book I'm reading really was very apologetic about like they really wanted to make peace with the Indians. You're like, no, no, they didn't.
Yeah, yeah,
They did
that's
not.
a
That did
little
not happen. But
that might be a little revisionist.
yeah, it's a little revisionist, but still. But yeah, I think it's super interesting and more than I knew. I thought that it was, you have this idea when you're a kid that it's like three people on a canoe, but it was actually a pretty big production for the time and interesting that you can just like keep yourself alive walking across the country.
So I obviously last podcast covered the Uruguayan rugby team recently, and then as of like last Thursday, Society of the Snow came out on Netflix. Did you see that?
No, I didn't watch it yet,
Oh my
but
God,
I,
please watch it. You have to watch it.
I
But
will.
like it obviously very different situation. Those people had no clothing, no gear, nothing like that.
Hmm.
And they had to walk like 31 miles to get to civilization again.
Hmm.
So vastly different in terms of like their experiences, but it just showed like how the slightest issues that you encounter on these totally unpredictable treks can just
Hmm.
completely derail you and I mean, basically be a death sentence. So the fact that 29 out of 30 survived is just like remarkable.
Yeah. No, it's pretty great.
Good for them.
Fitting. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
also kind of get the fact that they didn't write anything down because once I'm done with a project, I'm like, dude, leave me alone.
Yeah,
Like,
I kind of get that too. You're like, what? I don't want to do like a post-mortem on this. I just want to do my next
yeah, I just finished walking
thing.
4,000 miles. Like, can we just move this up a couple of decades and I'll just cover it after I'm dead? That's
Yeah,
probably why they killed
totally.
themselves. They're like, I'm not going to write all this down.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a big deal. And then it's
Fun.
it's interesting that people forgot about it for a while and then it's back. Or then they came back and now it's like a classic tale of American bravery, etc.
Ingenuity.
Yeah.
Fun. It's a fun
Yeah.
story. How did you come up with this one?
I was just thinking about, I don't know, I was thinking about exploration in general, and then I was just wondering, I feel like I didn't know much about the details of this one, so I figured I'd look it up. And
Obviously, I didn't either. I thought they died up being eaten by Native Americans, which obviously
no,
didn't happen.
nope, not true.
Um, cool. Okay, very fun. Anything you want to shout out as we wrap things up?
Yeah, well, speaking of the alive guys, have you heard all the crazy stuff that happens on planes this week? Lindsay,
Um,
my
yeah.
cousin Lindsay texted me about this, but like that, well, in Japan, that plane that exploded on the runway, it was just like in Tenerife
Yep.
almost.
Yep. You sent me
And
that too.
and everyone, the people, there was like a smaller plane and a bigger plane. And the small plane, I think it was their fault. Some people did die, but the big plane, everybody survived. And the article that Lindsay sent me that I was reading is like because everyone followed the rules and no one took their luggage, they got out fast enough. Like if everyone would have panicked, so if it would have been in America, they would have been dead.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that is a uniquely non-American trait to like actually look out for the
100%.
collective and not for yourself.
Yes. So amazing. A super miracle that everyone survived that. But then also that Alaska airline plane where the door blew off. Did you see that
So
one?
crazy. Yeah, I saw
Oh
that
my
one
God. And
too.
no one died then either because no one was sitting next to the door. So it just blew off and
Yeah,
they landed.
and then I
Incredible.
heard that somebody punched a stewardess in the face
On that one?
on a different flight. I forgot what airline. Maybe it was Delta that somebody actually hit a stewardess in the face because they were like asking him to do something or not do something, and then he got pissed off and they had to deviate the flight over to Dallas and land there to kick the guy off.
Oh my God, that's so annoying. How mad would you be?
I know.
I would be
I
so
know.
mad.
Seriously. So a lot of fun plane stuff going on these days.
Yeah, it's wild. I'm gonna go on a plane next week, so it'll be fine.
Where you going?
Oakland.
Uh,
For a day. But yeah, no, it's probably fine. I don't sit next to the window anyway, and now I definitely feel like justified in not sitting next to any kind of doors or anything.
I think
That's
your
great.
best bet is to be over the wings because I feel like the wings are the part that's like the most reinforced.
I feel like that too, but who knows?
I mean, yeah, whatever happens, who the hell knows? No, you'll be fine. You'll do great.
Yeah. It's fine.
Cool. So yeah, as I kind of started this podcast out, this episode, please do write to us. We always love to get feedback. Doomedifellpod@gmail.com. Follow us on all the socials. We're excited to start year 2 of doing this and see where that takes us.
Woo! Thanks, Fars.
Awesome. Thanks,
All
Taylor.
right.
We'll go ahead and cut this off.